Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Crazy Talk, where we explore ideas from the fever swamps of the internet to question prevailing narratives with the goal of empowerment and liberation. Just a reminder, I'm not trying to convince you of anything, just sharing thoughts and information. So please, don't take my word for any of this stuff. As always, do your own research. Hey folks, welcome back. This week we're tackling one of the biggest, if not the biggest, conspiracies out there, Flat Earth. And before you go posting comments calling me retarded or whatever, please remember this channel is called Crazy Talk. I'm not trying to convince you of anything, so if you're a Flat Earth hater, feel free to click away. And go on, scram. Okay. When I first heard about Flat Earth being a thing, my reaction was, whatever. At that time, I was pretty sure we were all living in a simulation anyway, so I couldn't see what difference it made, whether we're on a globe or a flat Earth, whatever. I get it now, and more on that later. There does seem to be a growing number of people who believe in what we call Flat Earth, and I think it's fair to say that none of them started out believing. No, they were all globe earthers, you might say, who thought Flat Earth was ridiculous and set out to prove Flat Earthers wrong. Whoops. Now, before we get into the so-called proofs, let me introduce a few key aspects of the Flat Earth story or idea that you may or may not be familiar with, along with some of the implications. So I've done some digging, and here's my take on what I've found. The Earth, or Terra, is just one of many realms on what may be an infinite plane. In other words, there is no edge to fall off of, and there are two boundaries for Earth in this model. A circular ice wall enclosing our oceans, or pond, so to speak, and that's what we call Antarctica on our globe Earth maps. In the Flat Earth model, there's no South Pole, and the North Pole is actually Mount Meru in the center of the pond. And so the other boundary is the firmament, which is a dome made out of something like frozen water, I guess, that goes over our realm and comes down to the ice wall that surrounds us. So we're sort of in a terrarium, and there's that word Terra again. I'm not sure if the other realms have their own firmament. Maybe some do or some don't. I just haven't delved deeply enough to know what the deal is there. My suspicion is that Earth, along with humanity, is some sort of grand experiment with the experience of evil. And so we may be in a kind of quarantine, more or less. Maybe the experiment is a bit dangerous. It seems kind of dangerous these days. From what I gather, there are supposed to be 4 gates in this ice wall leading to the outer realms. And Antarctica, or really the ice wall, is closely guarded by the powers that be. Now that's actual fact. Regular folks are not allowed to travel to Antarctica except on very supervised visits, and there's kind of an exceptional international treaty protecting it, keeping folks at bay. All of that is for real. So in the Flat Earth model, the sun and moon rotate around the Earth, or really around the firmament. They're not millions of miles away, as we've been told. They're pretty much local. And many believe that the moon and the planets are not solid matter, but actually something like plasma energy, which is pretty much like the sun and stars are supposed to be, right? So basically, in the Flat Earth model, there's no space as we've come to know it through science fiction or the fiction of science taught in schools. And NASA is a CGI Photoshop factory and a massive money laundering scheme. Their budget does come to $68 million a day, so there is that. And anyway, all these photos we've seen of Earth growing up, the blue ball, all Photoshopped, along with all the other photos of planets, galaxies, and such. So, of course, that means there is no moon landing, which needs to be another episode of Crazy Talk. So no astronauts, no satellites, no actual space program, no mission to Mars. Sorry, Elon. Of course, there are rockets, but they don't seem to go straight up, and they don't penetrate the firmament. Whenever you watch a rocket launch, they always seem to curve. Have you ever noticed that? I always wondered about that. Well, in this model, they can't go straight up or they bounce off the firmament. And actually, sometimes you do see these weird ripples, almost like the wake of a boat in water. I realize all of this probably sounds incredibly dumb, especially if you're just encountering it for the first time. But one thing that's actually way easier to believe, at least for me, with the flat Earth model is aliens or extraterrestrials. In the globe Earth model, the nearest planetary system where aliens might even come from is vastly far away. The nearest is the Alpha Centauri system, and the closest star there is 4.25 light years away. Now that's roughly 25 trillion miles. Honestly, I think distances like that are inconceivable for most of us. Let's say the aliens have a really, really fast flying saucer. It doesn't go 100 miles an hour, it goes 25,000 miles an hour. Pretty fast, right? Well, that would still take them 10,000 years to get here from Alpha Centauri. How the hell do they make that trip? Well, in the flat Earth model, our realm is Terra. And, there's openings in the ice wall, so extraterrestrials are extra to Terra. That just means folks who live outside of our ice wall. And that might mean thousands of miles, maybe tens of thousands of miles at most. Hey, no problem to travel that distance, right? Way more believable. And so that brings me to various maps of the outer realms. Like, how the hell does anybody know what's out there? I don't know. There's a popular one called Terra Infinita, and I didn't do that much digging. For all I know, it just comes from somebody's acid trip or fantasy fiction or whatever. But here it is, and to be honest, I don't know how many flat earthers believe in this outer realm stuff. But, hey, aren't all flat earthers just incredibly stupid? Like, just absolutely retarded? Isn't this whole flat earth nonsense so painfully easy to debunk? Well, no, actually. And let's get into that a bit. So people talk about proofs. And for me, the simplest and most compelling of all the proofs have to do with what we can see below the horizon line. The first one I'm aware of took place in 1838 at a place called Bedford Canal in England. And Bedford Canal is about 20 miles perfectly straight. And so, of course, water being level, what a great place to demonstrate the Earth's curvature, or lack thereof. So in one of the experiments, a white sheet was mounted on a frame with the top of the sheet 6 feet above the ground, 6 miles from the observer, which was actually a cameraman. Well, given the supposed curvature of the Earth, the top of that sheet, 6 miles away, should actually be 18 feet below the horizon, making it impossible to see. Well, in 1904, Lady Elizabeth Ann Blount hired this commercial photographer to take a picture of our famous white sheet 6 miles away, and lo and behold, the photographer was able to obtain a clear picture. Now, there are tons of experiments like this, and they're often debunked by globe earthers saying, well, it's just atmospheric refraction, which is a real thing, but there are limits. I went to Grok for help with this to do the math, and he tells me in this experiment with the white sheet, refraction might lift our view of the top of the sheet by 1 to 3 feet in typical weather, 5 to 6 feet at the extreme, but still nowhere near the 18 feet needed to see it. So now there's this wonderful camera called the Nikon P900 Infinite Zoom. And of course, we have lasers. So experiments can be carried out over much greater distances. One of the ones I saw recently happened on the Great Salt Lake in the U.S., at a distance of 21 miles using a camera and lasers. So now on a handy-dandy online curvature calculator, it's easy to find that if the observer is 5 feet above the ground, the target would need to be on a tower 220 feet tall to be seen at that distance of 21 miles. In other words, without a tower, it would be 222 feet below the horizon and obviously invisible. Again, there's tons of experiments like this, sometimes over hundreds of miles, and you can find all this stuff on Rumble or even YouTube. So now there's lots of other proofs. I'll just share a few with you I got from an Eric Dubay video. Now, Eric Dubay seems to be one of the top flat earthers. He has books and videos, although there's tons of other videos and even whole documentaries out there by other folks. So here we go. In photographs by NASA, you always see the curvature of the Earth, right? Well, that's because they use a fisheye lens to create it. How do we know that's true? Well, amateur photos always show a flat horizon, no matter the elevation. You know, people send up weather balloons. There's the U-2 spy plane at 70,000 feet. It's always flat. Another phenomenon is that whenever we're looking at the horizon, we always see it at eye level, even if we're up in a jet 35,000 feet. So if we were on a globe Earth the size it's supposed to be, we would actually be looking down at the horizon. It would not be eye level. And of course, water is always level, and the Earth is, I guess, 70% water. So the obvious question is, how does it bend around the curve? How is the water upside down on the bottom of the globe? Stupid question, right? Except, well, how is it upside down? The answer, of course, is gravity. But how is gravity strong enough to hold trillions of gallons of water to the Earth, but weak enough for birds and butterflies to flit about? You know, if you really think about it, how come the birds and butterflies aren't crushed to the ground? And, you know, rivers, of course, always flow downhill to reach sea level. But the thing is, if we live on a globe and the river's long enough, it would have to go up over the curve of the Earth to reach the sea level, right? The Mississippi River is 3,000 miles long. If you do the math, it would actually have to ascend 11 miles to go down the other side and reach the Gulf of Mexico. And surveyors, engineers, and architects never factor in the supposed curve into their miles-long bridges and canals. There's also the issue of the stars not moving. You know, in the globe Earth model, we're not just orbiting the sun is zooming around the galaxy and we're chasing it, basically, you know, at a gazillion miles an hour. So why don't the stars change? We know from archaeology that they're in basically the exact same place they've been for at least 4,000, 5,000 years. How is that if we're really moving the way we're supposed to be? Another supposed proof that kind of gives me a headache is the mystery of flight paths. Like, how come so many direct flights between 2 points in the southern hemisphere have to zigzag up to the northern hemisphere and come back down? Doesn't make any sense. They're flying almost twice as far or more than they need to, right? Unless you look at the route on a flat Earth map. There's also clips of pilots being asked point blank, hey, is it curved out your window when we're flying? And they always kind of sheepishly say, nope, it's flat. And, you know, honestly, there's no correction built into the airplanes for the curvature. You know, you'd think if we're going around this ball without a constant downward angle, shouldn't the planes be really headed off into space? Yeah. Another thing that kind of blows me away is that, you know, the Earth is spinning, right? That's how we have day and night in the globe Earth model. And it's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. Wow. Well, if that's true, if you were headed from San Francisco to New York, that's about 2,500 miles. So if the Earth is spinning toward you at 1,000 miles an hour, shouldn't you be able to just go up in a helicopter, hover for 2.5 hours, and New York would be rushing toward you? You just have to land, right? Well, that doesn't work. I guess some people say, well, no, the atmosphere is somehow stuck to the Earth by gravity and it's moving and, no, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, to get to New York, most jets fly about 500 miles an hour. It takes 5.5 hours to get there. And there's a similar issue with shooting a bullet, or in the old days, they'd shoot a cannonball straight up. Now, if the Earth is spinning that fast, when the bullet or cannonball comes down, it should come down way to the east. But it doesn't. It always comes straight down. One of my favorite proofs, if you will, is the matter of corpuscular rays, maybe because it's so pretty. If the sun is gigantic compared to the Earth and millions of miles away, wouldn't all the rays coming from the sun be parallel? Well, yeah, they would. But if you see corpuscular rays, they're coming down, they're slanting down at an angle, and it's actually always the same angle. So if you follow that angle up, that should show you where the sun actually is, and simple math puts it up about 4,000 miles. In the flat Earth model, it's also not as big as the Earth. It's, very strong, but it's not that big. So there's a ton of these proofs, if you will, more than I can cover in a short video. But hey, they're all super easy to refute. Just call whoever brings them up a stupid retard and unscientific. Problem solved. Okay, I'm sorry. Flat Earthers do tend to be a little defensive because they do get called a lot of names. I'm not trying to convince you that the Earth is flat, but if you're interested, do your own research. Or don't, I don't care. But let's look at the implications of all of this. If the Earth really is flat and the globe Earth and all that science around the Earth being a globe is fake, just a made-up story, well, then a whole lot of people are lying to us and have been for about 100 years. Why would anyone do that? And who would do that? Well, on the internet, the who is fairly simple. It's, this long game played by a group of psychopaths who want to rule the world, enslaving humanity. Some say it's the Masons or the Illuminati. I don't know. But why would they concoct a globe Earth story? That's what I just didn't get when I first heard about it. It's like, well, what's the deal? Well, if you think about it, the globe Earth says that we're on a spinning ball in the vast emptiness of space, and really here at the whim of random chance. Well, that means humans are insignificant, a blip. Our lives are meaningless, of no importance, and really there's no purpose to life. So we might as well just try to maximize our pleasure. The winner is the one with the most toys when they die. The flat Earth model, on the other hand, implies that humans are probably very important indeed, that we were created, the Earth was created deliberately, probably by God or some such, for some purpose, and therefore our lives do have meaning. So we're not just widgets or farm animals to be managed by our would-be totalitarian overlords. The implications are actually profound. Okay, one more thing. This isn't really any kind of proof, but when my wife and I started looking into this flat Earth thing, she began to notice anytime we'd watch a movie or a TV show, there would be a globe in the scene, usually in the background. Like the kind of globe you might buy at a gift shop or whatever. And she started pointing this out to me, which I have to admit was irritating at first, but damn, they really show up in so many more movies than I would have ever expected. And I have to admit, that does reek of a psyop, right? Anyway, if you're interested in this, I'm going to post links to a lot of groovy videos in the description below. For me, this has been kind of a fun exploration, but watch out. Some folks get really upset about this stuff. I'm not even sure why. If you like this video, then please do hit the like button and consider subscribing. You know the drill. And as always, have a great rest of your day.